Invigor Book and Buy ends November 14th. Run, don't walk to invigorbookandbuy.ca to find out how to get $30 off per bag. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to Real Agriculture. Today, we are going to dig into the science of misinformation and how that makes many consumers fear their food. This week at the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity's Public Trust Summit, Dr. Joe Schwarcz shined a light on the myth makers. We know what they're saying about our food and what can be done to bust some of those myths. Schwarcz is the director of McGill University's Office of Science and Society. He's a prolific author. We're going to talk about his new book. He's a career myth buster, and he joins me now. Hello, Dr. Schwarcz. Hey, great to have you on Real Agriculture.
Hi. It's very interesting. You did the intro by saying the science of misinformation, and that actually is very good because the misinformants actually try to make a science of the of how they get the message out. Unlike most scientists who are engaged in research and don't think too much about how to get their information out to the public, the alarmists and the activists do, and they hold focus groups, on how to get their pseudoscientific message out. So there really is, on their side at least, there is a science to the misinformation. They really do work at trying to figure out how to make it most impactful.
Yeah, let's jump in and have a look at that. At the meeting this week, you said, that food misinformation is rampant. You're seeing a tsunami of anti-science movements. You said the quacks are taking over. Joe, how tough is it out there?
It is very tough. And sometimes, it feels like we're marching in mud when we try to counter all of this. And today, some of the misinformants have risen to really high levels. And obviously, I'm talking about Robert Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health in the U.S., which is just astounding how someone who really is scientifically illiterate now is at the head of the U.S. health pyramid. And of course, he does turn his guns on food. And some of the stuff he says, admittedly, has some semblance of science. I often use the expression that even a blind squirrel sometimes finds an acorn, and Kennedy is as blind as you can be. But he certainly makes some points against people's overindulgence in ultra-processed foods today. And yes, people are eating too much saturated fat, too much salt, too much sugar. This we know. But I can't forgive all his other indiscretions, just because he gets something right. For example, the seed oils. I mean, this is so absurd to suggest that seed oils, canola oil, etc., are somehow detrimental to health, whereas we have decades of research on this, and we know that polyunsaturated fats are healthier than the saturated fats that he is telling us to eat. He is promoting beef tallow. We should be frying French fries in beef tallow. I mean, this is something that we've dismissed decades ago, based on sound science. And here it is coming back again.
Yeah. Now, Joe, we have so much pseudoscience out there. Building on that, you got the food babe. You've got Anthony Williams. I believe you call him the medical medium, right?
That's what he calls himself. This is a totally uneducated man who has again risen to great heights. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and basically he says that he doesn't really give the advice himself. He communicates with the spirit of a dead doctor, and that's how he gets his information. And he goes on the radio and he tells people what to do about their health. He's not accused of practicing medicine without a license because he's very clever. He says he's not doing anything. He's just a conduit from the spirit world. And the spirit constantly tells everyone to drink celery juice. That's the universal cure-all. Now, there's nothing wrong with celery juice, except that your palate might rebel when you drink it. It's not one of the tastiest things, but there certainly is nothing magical about it. It's actually very low in nutrients. But this is the kind of thing that we face, and this guy is a New York Times bestseller. How does that happen? Because people are seduced by simple solutions to complex problems. Nobody wants to be told that they need surgery or chemotherapy, or any other kind of treatment. It's much more inviting to think that you can battle whatever problem you have by consuming some natural product such as celery juice. And of course, therein lies another myth that somehow nature knows what to do, and that everything natural is benign and anything synthetic is dangerous, which is, of course, total nonsense. We don't make decisions on the risk-benefit ratio of any substance based on whether it was produced by Mother Nature in the field or by a chemist in a lab. What we do is take a look at the science behind it, and there's nothing to do with whether it's synthetic or natural.
Just building on that, Joe, I mean, how do we bust these myth makers? And I think going back to that, you're saying we have to do some critical thinking.
We do, and of course, I struggle with this all the time on how to try to convince people, about various issues, about why they should be vaccinating their kids, etc. And my usual weapon is the peer-reviewed literature, and I try to guide people to understand how we in the scientific world communicate with each other and how we come to a conclusion. I mean, why should they believe me when I say don't be bothered about the nonsense about seed oils, or don't listen to people who tell you that Tylenol is dangerous during pregnancy? And the way to get them on board, I find, you can't always be successful, but by telling them how the world of science works, how researchers carry out their work in a lab, then write up a paper, submit it to a journal. The editor then sends it out to referees who are experts in the field. Then there's a lot of back and forth. Very often, they will ask for reworking of a paper, more research to be done, and eventually a decision is made on whether to publish it or not. And while it's not set in stone, because of course humans being humans, there's fraud possibility, which we have certainly seen with Andrew Wakefield's dreadful paper telling people that autism is connected to vaccines. But nevertheless, it is the best weapon that we have.
Joe, you talked about, I guess, the need to understand science, to get invested in science, to get young people involved in science. It's something that, is confusing for a lot of people. It's a big ask. How do you do that? I mean, obviously, how do we create a culture of science and wanting to ask questions?
It's a long process because, honestly, I can go out and give a talk to a group. What good does it do? It is based on them having to believe what I say. Some will, some will not. The only way that you really can have a grasp of how science works is by having worked through it, by studying it, by doing experiments yourself. That's how you can come to conclusions about what works and what doesn't. And I think you have to start very early on in elementary school and infuse into them the scientific method. That is, how does one go about solving a problem? How do you design an experiment? How reliable is that experiment? And this has to continue through high school and through university. That's how people can, quote, learn the truth. It's from the inside. You have to understand the process. You have to know who to believe and where you find reliable information. And that doesn't come from hearsay from someone else. It has to come from yourself by having worked through it. you know, it's a struggle, but it's work that is worth doing. And I think we need to emphasize science teaching in elementary schools and in high school. It boggles my mind that there are students these days who can graduate from high school without ever having taken a course in chemistry or biology.
Yeah.
Given the world that we live in, which is dominated by science. I mean, we make scientific decisions every day, of course, not consciously, but any time you take a medication, you're making a scientific decision. Whenever you decide to eat one food over another, you're making a scientific decision. And it's so important to understand the basics of science so that you have at least something upon which you can, base your own decisions.
Hey, final thought on this, and this is a tough fight. I interviewed you, I think, for the first time maybe 10 years ago, and again, the solutions we're discussing are very similar to the discussions back then. And then as you look to the future, is this a battle the farm and food industry can win, or at least stem the tide?
I think we can win some battles. I don't think we can win the war. And I think some things are worse now than they would have been 10 years ago. I mean, to have Kennedy in the position that he is it's an affront to science. And so I think we have to fight even harder. But all we can do is get our message out there, do as much public speaking as possible, get involved in radio, TV, or wherever is possible. And I think scientists who are working in labs, in research labs, they also need to get out there and talk about what they do. And unfortunately, too often they're not interested. They're happy in the ivory tower just doing their research. And they sort of don't want to get into the mud and roll around with the pigs. But I think that is absolutely necessary. We need a cohesive effort of everyone working together to undermine the nonsense that is proliferating out there.
Speaking of getting the message out and sharing information, you are, of course, a prolific author, and I want to ask you about your new book, Better Not Burn Your Toast. What are you telling people?
It is a series of articles, as most of my books are, that looks at the world from a scientific perspective. And I talk about food and cosmetics and medications and history. And in this particular case, the title refers to a potential carcinogen that can form if indeed you burn your toast. It's called acrylamide. And it allows me to talk about the risk-benefit ratio and the hazard risk analysis, put some numbers into it, and say that, well, it's not enough to know that if you burn your toast, you can form some acrylamide, which indeed is a carcinogen. You have to ask the question, how much acrylamide forms? How do we know it's a carcinogen? What animals have been used? Do we have any human data? So these are the interesting questions, that are brought up by something as simple as thinking about whether or not you should be eating burnt toast.
Now, you always talk about dose makes the poison, right? And you've talked a lot about what's in food and what's, what we're consuming, but it all really comes down to that.
It is. I mean, the dose makes the poison, of course, is the cornerstone of toxicology. And in the case of acrylamide, I'll let the public know, even without buying the book, that, you don't have to worry about eating the occasional burnt toast. But you don't want to eat charcoal broiled steak every day. The dose is very important. And there's also a corollary that we have to add to the dose makes the poison argument, which is a valid argument, is that indeed that dose sometimes can be very small, vanishingly small. When we look at things like botulin produced by the Botulinum clostridium bacterium or ricin, which is found in castor beans, these are so toxic that fractions of a milligram can do you in. So even though the dose is important, that dose sometimes can be very small.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, great stuff. The book is called Better Not Burn Your Toast. Appreciate you for taking some time and shining some light on this topic for us on RealAgriculture.com.
Thanks very much.